Welcome to Verify in Field, the millwork podcast. Here's Jacob.
Welcome back, everybody, to Verify in Field. Today, I have Larry Flock, who is an owner of the Kitchen Gallery, managing partner there. He's joining us today from, you were in the Pittsburgh area, is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah. So we met in person at IWF. You came by our booth and been a listener to the podcast. So happy to have you on. We're continuing to rack up the Pittsburgh numbers here on the Verify in Field podcast. So thanks for joining me, Larry.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, to get started, I don't know if you'd mind giving a little bit about your background, your career journey. I know you joined the business, Kitchen Gallery in '87. The business started in '76, but can you talk about, what you did before that, how you got into the industry, and then your journey since '87?
Sure. So my father's always been a cabinet maker. 1959, he started out of high school, and he started the business with a partner in 1976. January 76, I was a 10-year-old kid. I still remember them building the workbenches in my parents' garage, and I worked in that early shop, if you will, a good bit through high school and even college. So I went to college in '83, graduated in '87 from University of Pittsburgh, and at that time my father had purchased out his partner, so he was the sole owner. And I liked what he did. The economy in '87, let's say, was not 2024. So it seemed like a good option in '87 to join him. And we've worked there ever since. My brother joined a handful of years after me. And my older son, joined us about 5 years ago. So we're still family. And that's the part that I really enjoy. We're an old cabinet company.
And so can you tell us a little bit about today, the Kitchen Gallery, the types of clients you work with, the markets you work in, and kind of maybe how that's evolved since the start of the company?
Yeah. So when I started, my father did a lot of commercial casework, a lot of hospital casework, mall retail type work, more laminate work than wood. Today, we're a very custom, very high-end residential cabinet company, and we're targeting the best homes in Pittsburgh, and ideally the entire home. We're trying to do every part of that house if we can. So totally different today versus when I started, not only from a quality perspective, but also from, we're a wood shop at this point. We're finishing, staining, painting, etc. Where before we were mostly laminates and Korean work, that kind of thing. So a good bit different over the years.
Right. Awesome. And I imagine your facilities have evolved, and your staff, and their capabilities, as well as the clientele and the type of work you're doing has evolved.
They have. We were a little, I say this respectfully, because I think when you're the starting person and you get the first run, I kind of missed that first, 10 years or 12 years. A little different when you come for 11 or 12 years. But my father initially, they were in a small shop. They rented it in the basement of a building. And then in '87, we bought a building that we moved into in '88. That was about 8,000 feet on 2 floors. Today, we're at about 20,000 feet. And we moved in there about 21 years ago. So much different, much taller ceilings, much more opportunity to do things, with that space, equipment-wise. But I will say, in that middle building, that 1987 purchase, it was limiting, but we had edge banding. We bought our first CNC router in that building. We did a lot of things in that space, even though it was pretty limiting.
Yeah, I imagine you did a lot of things because it was limited. I think like they say, necessity is the mother of all invention. And I think a lot of times, I imagine as woodworkers, you're creative with how you use your space. You're creative, and it's constantly evolving. It's never very static, right?
No question about it. We kind of laugh, when we think about what we did in that building. But I think it makes you appreciate, when you have it a little bit better, and when you're not unloading a truck with 2 people, on each sheet of plywood, and we have a forklift go over. and pick the whole unit up at one time, it makes you appreciate the forklift a little bit more.
Yeah.
So
yeah, for sure. And remembering where you came from. So, we met in person at IWF. How many times have you been? Do you remember when your first visit to IWF was?
I do. 92. My father bought an SCMI that was really referred to as SCMI back then, an edge bander in 92. That was our first big purchase. We'd been doing a lot of hospital case work and still pounding laminate on the edges versus an edge bander. And that seems a little crazy today, but 32 years ago, it wasn't, common. So that was my first visit. How many times? Boy, I don't know, 8, 7, 8, 9 times. I've attended the last 2. I would say the one that we just went to was probably the most enjoyable for me, the most productive. I don't know, we didn't go in 20 with COVID. And I thought in 20, I don't know if I wasn't organized, if I don't know. It was productive, but I felt like this time was much more productive for me. But we had a lot of goals going in. We're considering different software, so we spent a good bit of time at Microvellum, at Cabinetry, at Energy. Those are all things that we're considering. We're also thinking about a flat line paint system, so we spent a good bit of time at Scheffler and also Styles with McCord. I also think we're a little more organized. My older son went 2 years ago, and I think he was also much more prepared, and that was enjoyable just to see that progress. My brother and I are kind of, we're old hats at this point at the show, but I love the show. I highly recommend it to anyone that, hasn't attended. And, I just mentioned software and equipment, but maybe, at least in our industry, an equally important part are all of the suppliers. All the hardware, all the plywood, all the paint and finishings, all of those different products. I think we get a little bit wild in that big, floor with all the equipment. But there's a lot to be said about all the other booths, whether it's your booth or Hayfela and Worth and all these other companies, ML Campbell, we use their paint products. So all those different vendors, it's just a really good opportunity to meet all them, look at the new products, look at what's selling, those kinds of things.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of the best one-stop shop for the whole industry, meeting your vendors, meeting what's out there, seeing what's new, seeing what's old, and then, meeting the people in particular that, you maybe correspond with or talk with, virtually or through email on a regular basis, but not in person. And so I think doing that, and then also being able to just touch, feel, ask questions, see stuff that, when we're in the day-to-day of getting projects done, you don't get the chance to kind of explore like that.
I totally agree. I don't know how many you've been to, Jacob, but I thought this year was, pretty busy compared to 2 years ago.
Yeah, no, definitely picked up a lot. Attendance was high. And I mean, I think, it's as big as I remember. My first one, I think, was 2014 I went to. So this was, 10 years from my first one. So I guess I've been to probably 4 or 5 now, however that works out. But yeah, it was good to see. I went to Vegas for the first time last year, and it's a world of a different, IWF versus Vegas.
Yeah, I've never attended that one, but very impressive booth, SDMI or SDM.
Yeah.
Very, very impressive. I thought it was a great show. I was very happy to be there.
Thinking back, in your experience since 87, at least within the business, and the investments you guys have made from a technology standpoint, whether it be machinery or software, what are the kind of big, kind of significant jump forward that you feel, whether it be the CNC or Edgebander, or is there anything that stands out to you over the years of your time in this business that were big, significant impacts to the business, whether it allowed you to take on so much more business or be more efficient or do new types of work? Like, when you think back, what are those kind of top, 2 or 3 milestones from a technology standpoint?
Yeah. So from a payback perspective, the edge bander was a quick payback. That was, I'm not saying it was an easy decision to purchase, but it was an easy decision to pay for it. You know, just a lot of people doing that task. It's also, you know, the newer ones, and maybe it's because we've been running them for 32 years. We've now had 3 of them. We're currently running an Olympic edge bander, but it's not the hardest thing to operate, if you will. You know, so not a lot of people within the organization can use them effectively. So from a payback and from a change, edge bander was a big difference maker. As far as moving the company forward, in my opinion, our first CNC router was a Como that we purchased at the show in '98. It was installed in '99. And that was a big step forward for us. You know, we bought the SimTech software package, which was part of Como at that time. And you know, we really didn't have a customer for that machine. We didn't have, frankly, even the people to operate the machine, you know, 1999. But we quickly found people to operate it. And once you can operate it successfully, then you can find clients. And we fortunately found a client the very first year we operated it in '99. And he is still the largest customer from a routing perspective in our organization. We now run a home ag router. But I've been cutting parts for that individual for 25 years. So, you know, it's kind of, you can't sell something you can't do. And sometimes you just have to take that risk to go out there. And by no means do we have 8 hours of routing to do every day. You know, so then we're trying to partner with people that are in a completely different industry, ideally. You know, they're not in the cabinet business. They're probably in the wood business or maybe the plastic business, but somebody that is not competing with us, if you will. So that would be probably the biggest difference. And then also the panel saw, you know, that's another, we bought our first panel saw, which was a Gibbon at the 2004 show. We've replaced that with a home ag unit as well. And that's a big, you know, just the software packages with that, you know, the cut right package versus what we were using 20 years ago. That's a big difference. That machine is much, much different than, you know, than our first purchase. But, and that's another one that's a little harder to find. I think clients, a lot of people can cut squares and rectangles, not as many people route parts, but we found a customer a few years after we bought the Gibbon that really helped us, and we cut many truckloads of parts for that customer. So again, you know, if you have it, you have the capacity, you can go out and sell it. If you don't have it, well, you know, pretty hard to do that.
So of those investments, you know, obviously they were, as you mentioned, with the CNC, kind of a risk, but it was, you can't serve those customers until you have the ability. Which of those felt like the biggest kind of gamble or risk going into it, making the investment?
The router, for sure.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, that was a whole different, again, you know, do we have the people that can use this software? Can we get trained properly? And again, in 2024, that may seem, you know, fairly easy. I don't think it's easy today, but it's easier. But if you back up to 98, you know, that wasn't so obvious. That show, Jacob, and I'm getting a little bit off subject, but at that show, the big companies were all doing cutting on a saw and then moving to a point-to-point. And there were some companies like Thermwood, Como, some other companies that were really trying to sell nested-based manufacturing, which was really kind of new in 98.
Right.
And the big guys were like, well, that's a terrible way to do it. You know, you can stack at your saw and cut, you know, 3 or 4 sheets at a time, and then just move the parts over that need to move over to the point-to-point. But I think, you know, and I'm looking back and reflecting a little bit on this, but I think what I saw then was a big advantage for large manufacturers. And what turned out to be a great opportunity for small manufacturers, because this nested-based idea and the fact that you could get into these routers and into this technology, yes, they're pretty big investments, but they're not millions of dollars. You know, it's hundreds of thousands. and many, many thousands of small manufacturers like ours have gone that route. And I think we had an advantage. We had lower cost than a lot of the big companies. So what I think looked like a difficult for small manufacturers turned out to be actually an advantage with all this equipment. Now, if you move forward to today, I think the risk for small businesses are the processes. I think the software, I think the ability to network with, like, you're using the same software as other companies. I think bigger companies, that pendulum has switched back a little bit, where their processes are so good that the smaller companies need to keep up and catch up.
Well, so I just to make sure I understand what you're saying, because I think that makes sense, is, there was a time where having access to the machinery was an advantage of the bigger companies. That is no longer an advantage. Anybody can kind of afford to buy a CNC, different levels of it, right, in the machinery. But now it's the processes, that the factors of scale that larger companies have over the smaller companies. Does that sound right?
That's right. That's right. It's the power of the software to get from a drawing to the machinery, in a very efficient. I think that's why you're seeing so much discussion about, and I don't like to pick companies, but you see a lot about Microvellum, you see a lot about Cabinetry, Energy, all these different companies, because these smaller companies are trying to keep up, if you will. That's right. My opinion. I think when the pieces were working a little more independently, it was a little easier for the smaller companies. As we keep connecting the dots, if you will, that's becoming harder and harder. So we're really looking at software and trying to figure out what direction we're going.
Right. Yeah, no, it makes sense, because that is kind of the next significant milestone and investment for you guys that opens up that next level of customer base efficiency and kind of scaling, I imagine, right?
Exactly. Now, the other big difference in the equipment is just if you compare a 98 router compared to a 2022 router, right. The way they load, the way they unload, the cycle time between sheets is just unbelievable. It doubles the production, just that process of getting the sheets off and getting the next one on, where before you were basically taking all those parts off, cleaning the table, putting the next sheet on. Now it's getting pushed off automatically. It's getting put on there quickly, and you're working on the parts while the other one is getting cut. So, right. That's changed a lot. And that's what really, that Como router, a fantastic machine, but what really pushed the investment was that ability to cycle through sheets.
You're buying time, basically.
That's right. That's exactly right. One person is operating that machine probably twice the speed. Even though they're not cutting twice the speed, you're getting twice as much production out of it, just the way it pushes off and gets the next one in.
Right. So where you're at now, you've gone from getting an edge banner to getting a nested base CNC to then investing in panel saws, and so you have all those capabilities in house now. You guys do a lot of parts production for other manufacturers, it sounds like, as well as full cabinets and kind of full kitchen work that you do?
Yeah. So the primary business is residential cabinets. We do some commercial here and there, but those are mostly just, we have a relationship with an attorney, and he has an office and he wants us to do his office kind of thing. It's not our core business. But so the core business is residential cabinets, kitchens, bathrooms, entertainment units, etc. But the equipment has more capacity than we need on the cabinet end. So yes, we do try to, fill in the gaps with some other people. And again, that one customer, 25 years, close friend at this point, really quite an inspirational individual. He has kept a lot of those gaps filled for 25 years. As crazy as that seems. But so I wouldn't say a lot of other people, but a few other people, and one in particular. Yes. But the core business is high-end residential cabinets. That's what we do. That's our core business. That's what people know us for, that kind of thing.
So obviously you talk about filling in the gaps and like basically capacity planning, right? There's a certain amount of your capacity that's filled with your core business, your residential cabinets, and then there's excess capacity that doesn't get filled with that on your machines that you fill with this other work. Has the way, just how you coordinate that, how you plan your resources, your shop time, has that changed over the years?
I would say yes, a little bit. The person that I'm talking about, that we fill in the gaps, if you will, he's somewhat of a seasonal business. So that he has 6 months where he's much busier than the other 6 months. So that, from a scheduling perspective, is a little bit challenging. Those 6 months we're really scrambling.
Right.
The other 6 months we have more opportunities with some other people, and frankly, there are more voids in that slower time. But and we're getting closer. His busy time is October to April, so we're getting ramped up, if you will. But so that does create some changes with where people are within the shop. And we actually some years bring in a few temp, employees to fill in that extra needed capacity. So
Okay.
yes, I don't know how it compared to 20 years ago. I mean, that's always been challenging from day one. I assume the last day I work here, moving employees around and filling all the capacities it will be always challenging.
So you said you're researching and kind of investigating all these different software, from Microvolt and Cabinvision to Energy. Do you guys use any type of software, or what does your planning shop capacity look like? Is it because I've seen all kinds of versions of this, of the calendar on your desk to the whiteboard in the shop to the full-blown ERP to Excel. It's always a moving process. It's one of the most complex things in our business, is moving, like you said, resources around, making sure everybody has work, but productive work, right? From that, the logistical part of it, right? What does that look like, and how has that evolved?
Yeah, so we do a lot of shop drawings. We're more of almost a commercial casework company in the shop drawing perspective. We're doing full drawings with all the dimensions in AutoCAD, and those drawings go out into our shop. So we're used to doing a complete set of very detailed drawings, more similar to, I think, a commercial casework company versus most residential shops. I think part of that, Jacob, is our market is we cater to architects, decorators, and general contractors. So even though we have a lot to do with the design, we're not the primary designer. So
Right.
We're involved in, this is an inset kitchen. We really don't want to make 30 cabinets. We want to combine 3 or 4 cabinets into one cabinet to create the best looking kitchen. Forget cabinets. We're trying to do a complete picture here. So we get involved in that. We get involved in what's the best hardware for that blind corner or that pull-out pantry or all those kinds of things. But the real first take on the design and inspiration is usually someone else. But we need to convey to that client, architect, decorator, contractor, and even the client themselves, we need to convey to them what we're doing, and then we need to be able to transfer that right into the shop. And so we do that through AutoCAD. And frankly, that's why I started with Microvolt, just because they're AutoCAD based. And we've been using AutoCAD for years. So, although I did have Cabinvision in last week, so it's still not an easy decision. But we really, to answer your question, we're AutoCAD, and we're doing full drawings.
Yeah, and then so going forward, you're researching different softwares for automating your engineering further and open up a lot more capabilities. What do you see after that? You decide on Microvolt, you decide on Cabinvision, and what does that open up for you? Obviously, you need operators, you need people to get trained on that. There's a process of implementing that. But is it just like the CNC, you're buying time, or is it opening up different types of work that you don't service today?
Well, I think from an employee perspective, it will allow us to be more, efficient, effective. We can go from the drawing to ordering. We can go from the drawing to the equipment in a much more, efficient, seamless manner. That in itself should free up some of the, strong employees that we have today. And then that would allow for expansion. Yeah. So
Right.
that's, we have one thing I haven't talked about. I don't mean to get off script, but we have a great group of people that work for us, and there's about 20 of us total. I think 10 of us moved, 8 shop employees, and my brother and I moved from the last building to this building 21 years ago. So, we have a very experienced group of people, and we're just trying to utilize that group the best we can and the most efficient way we can.
Yeah. Because I think that's something that, a lot of times, it's tough as a business owner making these decisions, right? Because all of them are somewhat an educated guess and a gamble and an investment that you're hoping pays off. But like you said, you have people, and those people are important to the business. And I think from an employee standpoint, there's always this kind of narrative or concern of like, well, is this software, machine, or technology going to replace me? And I think that from an owner standpoint, and really from the technology standpoint, that's never the goal, and that rarely is actually the case. But it's okay. I have these people that have experience and I value, but every employee you have spends a certain amount of their time on things that you would love to take off their plate, so they could spend as much of their time doing the things that they add the most value in. So from an engineer standpoint, like, okay, do I really need him spending his time doing these menial tasks, or are there things like that we can streamline, whether by process or software or technology, so that he can spend as much of his time as possible on the complicated things, which allows you to scale the business. It's not, none of it is mutually exclusive to, okay, I'm going to invest in this, which means eliminating this employee. It's what does that open us up to be able to have that person do, as opposed to what they're doing now. And does that allow us to take on more work, more interesting work, more complex work, to fill that void of what time is freed up from that? Do you find that, the change management of the people, how does that factor in when you're investing in these things and you're bringing on, whether it was implementing the Como, you said you got to find people to run it, or the SAW, changing your processes? Because from my experience, the change management and getting people to change the way they do things, a lot of times their resistance or apprehension is the most difficult part. It's not that the new process or the new technology is so hard to run or to implement. It's just getting a group of people to change what they do and to get on board with the vision. How do you approach that as an owner and kind of working with a team that has that much experience?
Yeah, that's difficult. So a couple of things. The equipment has never, in our case, eliminated a job. We've never been able to, nor is it even the goal, right? We're just trying to be efficient, and efficiencies allow for better pricing. Efficiencies allow to do more work. It's going to add positions, not take away positions. As far as the shop, I think, again, all that experience helps. They recognize that first hurdle that, my job's in jeopardy. They know that's not the case. Enough people have been there long enough to know that's not happening. But some people are easier, if you will, to change, to pivot. Some people are more set on their ways. I tend to be, on a personal side, I tend not to change very much at all. On a business side, I think it's critical. I think it is, you cannot be in business 49 years. I don't know that you can be in business 15 years if you're not willing to continue to change. So sometimes some employees are a struggle that way. They resist it. But I think ultimately, as owners, we have to make decisions to keep moving it forward, because you won't be in business if you don't. You have to get over that hurdle. And I think, like the purchases that we've made in the last couple of years, the new router, the new saw, the new drill and dowel insertion, those kinds of things, those were actually very easy things to do because we were already doing them. So these, the new ones were simply more efficient, easier to use. They were upgrades. There was already a physical spot in the facility for them.
Right.
Maybe they were a little different. Certainly the router was bigger, but I found those purchases pretty easy. The current ones that we're debating are actually, I find more difficult. The flat line painting, moving from, our doors, our shelves, our moldings from a booth to a line is not an easy change. We're also considering some sanding options, and then the software we touched base on. All those are really big changes. The sanding, not so much, but the painting and the software, big changes. And I've been slow to make a decision, frankly, because I see the impact, I see the learning curve, those kinds of things. In the case of the paint, I see the size of that booth in our shop, which is going to change some flow that we have. So, they're pretty big changes, and they're harder ones to make than the last few that we've made.
Right. And so, yeah, there are changes to your flow, changes, they're bigger, significant changes. You touched on the drill and dowel. You mentioned you went edge bander to CNC to panel saw. Do you remember at what point you guys started or invested in your first boring machine, doweling machine?
That was 2007. That was an AccuSystem machine, and it was a very good machine. And we bought I think it's called Coke, K-O-C-H. I never say it right, but I think it's Coke. And we bought that at the show 2 years ago.
I think that's always interesting. So you went edge bander first, then CNC, then you invested in a panel saw, and then in a doweler. And I think that's pretty common, flow people go, but I think it's always interesting to learn people's path in investing in technology and machinery in their shop.
Oh, yeah. I agree.
Well, before we wrap up, there's two questions I'd like to ask all my guests. I'm curious to see, your thoughts. What interventions or things do you think will shape the industry in the near future? What do you see changing in the next 5 to 10 years in our industry?
Well, we've already hit a little bit on the software. I think the software is the big next change. I think it's hard to see architects using the kind of softwares we were talking about, but our general contractors. But I see a lot more coordination between the software. We've already seen this a lot. 20 years ago, you physically sent a bill to a general contractor. The last 10 years, you may have emailed that bill. Today, you're going into some, software that general contractor uses, and your contract is in there, what you've been paid. Maybe there's a retention. Everything is visibly right there in front of you. And I think we're going to get there from the manufacturing side as well, not just the accounting side. So I would say software. We haven't hit on this too much, but our business is built on relationships. We work with the same people over and over again. If you counted 15 or 20 people, that's the vast majority of our business. Mm-hmm. And I think everyone's going to keep trying to build those relationships in the most effective way they can. Mm-hmm. And the software will allow us to do that.
Awesome. On the flip side, what do you see staying the same over the next 5 to 10 years in our industry?
Well, I think the importance of having a good group of people is just critical. I can only do so much. The person that runs our shop, Kevin, can only do so much. My brother, my son, the installers, the painter, everyone, our project manager, the people that start projects, they're great people in that capacity. That's going to be forever important. You are, putting together a good group of people, and then maybe equally important, putting together a good group of clients, that you're working for, people that are good to work with and communicate well and, pay on time. All these, critical things are consistent in their, in their mannerisms. So I think you're not going to replace the people, and I think it's going to start and finish with the people you're able to put together.
Awesome. I agree. That totally makes sense. I think that's where a lot of people are struggling is in the people, finding good people and finding as they need to add these things that you guys have added over the years, good engineers, good engineering, new technologies, finding people able to do that. But I do agree, because you alluded to this, even with our business is based on relationships, both customer relationships and employee relationships. And I think that's core to, no matter how the industry changes from a technology standpoint or a process standpoint, it's having those people you trust and rely on to execute.
Oh, yeah. I totally agree. Having a son 28 years old in the business is a big plus for me. It motivates you in many ways. But I always think back at the people that helped me when I was that age. And one of my father's big clients, they are still a top client of ours. I think he started working with them in 78 or 79. So that gives you, 45, years or so. And when I started working for that individual, his name is Bob, and Bob said, 90% of the people can get it 90% complete. I'm not interested in working with those 90%. So either you need to figure out how to get it 100% or you won't work for me. And, those kinds of things. And if you asked me to give some advice to younger people in the residential market, that simple thing of getting 100% complete is a big pitfall for many companies. And that's a critical thing to be able to do as a company, whether you're residential, commercial. You have to be able to get 100% complete.
You got to get those punch lists done. And I think that's where a lot of times everything can go great up until that final 5, 10, 2%. And that's the ending is how the client remembers you forever.
I totally agree.
Well, Larry, I really appreciate you coming on. I think what you shared today is really valuable. There's a ton of companies. Actually, we're doing at AWI National talk about a lot of this, which you touched on, is how companies in our industry are investing in technology in their journey and kind of educating newer people and younger companies in the industry. So I really appreciate you sharing you guys' story at the Kitchen Gallery. If anybody's interested in finding out more about you or the Kitchen Gallery or how they can work with you, what's the best way for people to find out more or contact you?
Yeah, LinkedIn would be best. LinkedIn, okay. Larry Flood Jr. So awesome. That would be best. And Jacob, I'd like to say I really like what you do. I think your podcasts are great. And I like the way you bring in different, commercial, big companies, residential, small companies, people on the software side. Flooring, I watched or listened to that one, last episode. I thought that guy was great. So really like what you do. So thank you.
Thank you, Larry. I appreciate it. I hope to have you on again in the near future. So thanks again for joining us.
All right. Have a good day.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. Do you want to stay up to date about industry insights, new content, and our community of millworkers? Go to ductworksmw.com to sign up for our newsletter. I'll see you in the next episode of Verify in Field.